Okay, welcome back to another episode, folks. You can hear the cows and sheep behind me. Today's video is a little bit different. It's an hour and 20 minutes long, and what we're doing is just explaining to the crew a bit about how to fill in a grazing plan, how grass is working, in a very simple way, just to get familiar with the process and make a plan for the year, because we have not actually been on a grazing plan yet so far. And the animals are coming off. We're on the neighbour's land right now. They're coming back to our farm tomorrow on a big move. And we're leaving these fields for cutting for haylage in about 5-6 weeks' time. So things are getting organised at the farm, and we've been through the process of filling in a holistic plan grazing chart and the considerations that go into that. And so I hope you find some benefit in that. It's a long video, but there's lots of information in there that I hope a lot of you will find very useful if you are interested in plan grazing yourselves. So enjoy. Let's first think about grass, and there's a few key points to make. So the whole point of this grazing plan is to get animals in the right place at the right time for the right reasons, you could say. And that's down to your context. There's no right thing. You might be trying to protect wildflowers. You might be managing to keep a diverse habitat that supports a rare nesting ground bird. You might be trying to maximize the amount of forage per area, or you'd have different reasons for what you're managing towards. And one of the key outcomes is about overgrazing. So I just want to explain what that means and how a grass plant works, because that's why we're making a plan, is so that we never overgraze a single grass plant. So overgrazing is simply about time in one place, and time until you return. And that has to do with the recovery period for grasses, which is different in every place. So we're working to the recovery we've seen on our field here. It would be different numbers. When we get to the number bit, it'll be different in Belgium, or even an hour south from here. So that's things you have to see, for yourself by spending a year observing. Now, what does this mean? Well, like, say we have our grass plant, and grass plants are quite different from all other plants on earth in that their meristems, the new growth, is coming from here. Whereas think of an apple tree, the new growth is at the end of the branch, right? So that tells you with childlike logic that the grass plant has evolved to be eaten. So grasses evolved with herbivores and masses of them. Just like fungi, 90% of the grass is actually its root mass, not the aerial part of the plant. And like most things in this universe, life is a mirror. So if you have a stunted grass that can't grow above ground, it's usually heavily compacted and not expressing its physiology underground. So if you go up the road to the neighbour's field at the top of the hill, that's what our grass looked like when we moved here. And it's stunted. You'll see all the same species you see in our fields, but it will never grow beyond that. It'll go to flower, and that's it. It's now in a different state of growth. So grass grows in an S-shaped curve, a sigmoid curve, where it goes at the start of the year. It starts stem elongation, and then the nodes start elongating, and then it goes into flowering, and it stops its vegetative growth at that point. So all grasses are aiming to go to seed by midsummer. So that's the sole desire of a grass plant. It wants to get to seed by midsummer, and then it's done with new growth. It's putting all its energy into seed, etc. So what you'll see up the road is they will get stunted about this tall and then yellow off for the rest of the year. Whereas we'll have the same species growing up to like a meter 50 tall, and it's just that they can express themselves down, so they can therefore express themselves up. So you can see what's happening under the ground by what's happening over the ground. So let's say we came through and we grazed this top bit away, right? Well, let's go back one step. So all plants are releasing short chain carbon into the soil, polysaccharides, sugars from photosynthesis to feed soil web, and that's in exchange putting nutrient back in the plant. So that's short chain carbon, really mobile in the soil cycle. But what happens when you come along and graze that off is that some of the annual roots will die back to balance the hydrological cycle of the plant, and that's long chain carbon, which is very stable and can be in the soil for thousands of years. And so that's what's happened over most of the world's surface where we've taken animals off the landscape, is we created deserts, and all that carbon that could have been 9 meters deep from perennial bunch grasses is now up in the atmosphere. And so our job is to never overgraze, to keep building this resource rather than keep using it up, which is what nearly every farmer in every field you've seen is doing. Because what happens when I graze this off, that plant goes into a state of stunted sort of behavior for 3 days. It's just like someone bit its head off and now it's just sitting there like eh. So that tells you the first rule of grazing is that you cannot stay longer than 3 days in one place with any animal of any kind. Like if you stay more than 3 days, you're overgrazing. And Joel Salatin puts this in a good way, because what's happened now it's been grazed is these little solar panels see the sun and they can start growing. So after 3 days they'll start growing and they'll start putting sugar back into the root system. But overgrazing is coming back and eating this again before it's put as much sugar as was or as much energy as was used up in what was consumed in the last grazing. So what happens in most fields is you have a field with 10 cows and they just walk around eating, and there's no movement other than their own movement back to fresh shoots. So this would be like what Joel Salatin calls like teenager grass, or it's like a better way would be like ice cream grass, right? And then once the plant has gone into this like woody state where it's not growing new growth and it's yellowing off and it's just focused on seed, he calls that like liver and tripe. And you think of it like it's a good analogy, because if you give Ragnar like here's a pot of candy and here's a pot of like, you know, baked livers, he's always going to go for candy, right? And that's exactly what the cows will do. And they will come back and judiciously nibble all this new growth straight away because it's super soft, super sweet, super tender. But what that means is that plant is now exhausting its root supply, and you will basically turn it back to 10-15 centimeter rooted nothingness that can't express its physiology. So all of those grasses in the field can grow 1.5 meters, 2 meters tall if the ground supports the root growth. And so that's where the rest period is. Like, so you need to leave this to grow back at least to the point it was before you come again. So that's the second bit of time. But it's complex because the grass is growing at different speeds throughout the year. So it's not a fixed thing. But that's like a basic idea. And so to take on this idea, like you could say if most of the animals you've ever seen on farms, they're just given a fixed field and they're left to go around and around eating the ice cream grass. Basically, if you go and dig those grasses up, the roots will be very shallow and they can't express themselves aerially. It's also bad for the hygiene of an animal, and you're not capturing carbon, which is the only way and the quickest way to build soil on a farm is ruminants turning grass to meat. So what you could do hypothetically is put a fence up here, and now you could leave this half for 180 days to recover, and in 180 days it'll be up to your shoulders. But likewise you could put another fence in here, and now each patch would get 270 days recovery. See what I mean? So what we're doing by breaking up the field is allowing each individual bit to have much longer to recover, and likewise you could put even more breaks in. So that's what we're doing with our daily moves, is breaking up this big land unit into lots of small units that then increases the recovery time everywhere. So that's what this whole planning sheet is about, is a mathematical formula to make sure you never come back somewhere before it's ready, and you never stay somewhere more than 3 days. And we're moving every day, so that's easy. That recovery time, in our case, varies 20 to 45 days. Like at the quickest time of growth now, you could cut that and in 20 days it'll be back up. Okay? And in slower times of year, it'll be down to like 45 days. Our growth typically starts, we say 1st of May. That varies, but we can put it in there. And we typically say end of October is dormancy. So that means when you get there, if you graze the field, there's nothing coming back until next year. But you get this idea of like, you can manage the rest period by breaking things up into other pieces, right? And our job is making sure each grass plant is putting back the energy that it was consumed before. So one simple way to look at that is making sure it, you know, if it had 3 leaves before, then you make sure it has at least 3 leaves again. A really safe way is when it has 4 true leaves and the lower one is going yellow at the end, then you know it's recovered and it's totally safe to graze. Most grazers have always been taught at agriculture university to keep the grass at this point in vegetative growth. But what you find if you look at tall grasses that are starting to go woody, you have masses more protein down here because it's near the root, and you have masses more energy up here because it's near the sun, and you can allow an animal to express its physiology and eat the bits that it wants. So there's amazing, you can get really into technical grazing. We're just looking at a very simple way to get started when you don't know anything about how many animals your land could support, or you haven't even worked out your recovery days because you've only just moved to somewhere or whatever, you know. So you can do this with no knowledge, and each year your knowledge will get better. Like a garden plan, you put a plan down, you follow it, you make notes, and next year you make a better plan straight away. And in that way, yeah, this is what everyone was taught, but it doesn't allow the grass plant to express its physiology, and it doesn't allow the animal to express its physiology, which is the cow knows what it wants to eat much better than you do, because its life depends on it. You will see things like cows coming through fields eating things that apparently they don't eat, like thistles, because they're full of protein. Or you'll find them grazing a weed that a farmer would try and eradicate just to allow light through to the grass underneath, and they'll come back a few hours later and the sugar reading in that grass has gone up, 80%. So of course they know what they want to eat. So our job is to let things express their physiology as fully as we can, and this is the basis of how grass has evolved. Like packs of herbivores, millions and millions of them, moved around by predators such as hyenas, wolves, whatever, and so they were constantly moving, and so that allows all of this material to be turned back into manure and urine and covered on the ground very evenly, because the animals are in a small tight herd, but then they're not coming back for a long time. And if you look at ecology, that's the basis of all ecosystem management, is this patchy intermittent disturbance. So like imagine if there's 100 million bison here, they're going to snort through and totally trash the place, but they're going to cover it totally with manure, and they're not coming back for the next year or whatever. And that's the same principle in the forest. You see here in Sweden the wild boar come through the forest, totally snuffle it over and trash it, but then they don't come back, and that causes like a flurry of succession of all the antedescendant species that keep the system healthy. So that's a real fundamental insight into how nature governs itself. It's like big patchy intermittent disturbances, and you could see that in your own psychology. Like you know, it can take like a big event to like snap you out of your patterned way of doing things, and like, I need to sort my life out, and you know, it can take like a near-death accident to like change your eating habits or that sort of thing. And so it's a pattern that is there. So that's a really key thing to get in your head. Like, overgrazing is only about time in one place and time till you return. And that's like something that's been very misunderstood. Like, all the range scientists of the last 100 years have been taking animals off landscapes and creating deserts, basically. And they extend over 60% of the world's surface. So it's obviously management that is critical. So what do we want to look at next? Yes, so one thing we try and do more nowadays, rather than graze at this mid-growth place, which we have done in the past. We had like 10 cows and 50 sheep on just our farm, not even our neighbour's farm. So at that point we were trying to aim for absolute maximum yield to support the amount of animals we had. But now what we like to do is let grass express its physiology fully. We want big, tall grass plants, and we're aiming to trample a lot of it on the ground. So we want to leave a little bit standing, different ages of grass plants standing up. We want to trample, like, so maybe 10% standing, 40% trampled, and 40% eaten and turned back into urine and shit, covering each little patch quite well. And from this grazing perspective, this would be seen as wasteful. But what we're doing is putting carbon back into our savings account. Like, this way of grazing, overgrazing, is credit card living. And what we're trying to do is invest in the future. And you'll see, if you watched old videos back in that drought 2 years ago, as all of the neighbours' land was going yellow, we had Timothy and Coxford and orchard grass like up to my shoulders. You couldn't even see the egg mobiles when you opened them. You couldn't even see the door, and the hens would just be tunneling around underneath. And yet everyone's in drought, and we're in rampant growth. Now, once we'd trampled it and gone through, of course it's had trouble regrowing because it didn't rain for 120 days. But what we found is that thick layer of mulch on the ground, like this thick, you could pull it apart and there's still active soil life on the surface, which you would not see in Kentsfield. So it's really good to observe that while you're here, is look at the neighbour's land up there, because that's what we started with. And it's one of those things you can't see how it's changed unless you followed it through, because it's dramatically different than it used to be. But you can also compare it a bit to Kent's, because you'll see the same species but very different growth. So interesting thing. So we want to translate this information into a plan that means we don't ever overgraze. And to do that, we're doing a weird plan this year that we've never done before. We're going to work with 2 sets of numbers, and I'll explain what I mean. But it looks very complex, but we're taking this is how I'd recommend anyone begin before they have information to do it even more scientifically. So we don't know, in this plan it's not paying any attention to the number of animals we have. It's just a mathematical formula to make sure we don't overgraze, and that's fine for us because we don't have enough animals. If we were like on the limit of the stocking rate of our land, then we would need to be getting into animal days per hectare, much more technically. So an animal day per hectare is the amount of animals that can be fed for a day on a hectare. And then you can translate animals to each other. So a cow is a standard unit 1, and 5 sheep is the same as 1 cow, and a bull is 2 cows. So now you can take your flock and start with a universal figure. And obviously those numbers change through the year because you have a lamb, or you sell them for meat or whatever. So that makes it easy to calculate, and you can start building records up of how many animal days per hectare your different fields can support, and use that in your next year's plan. But I show people this way because it's like you can move to a place and do this and get started. And it seems like all the numbers we're going to talk about are totally arbitrary, but they are perfect and they always work out. And our grass has been radically improving and we've never overgrazed. So it's a bit of a funny mathematical thing, but you just have to go with that. So there's an aid memoir that comes with this that explains how to fill it in, and I'll just summarize it to you now. So you fill in the chart. We're in 2020, it's a growing season, so we know that grass stops growing here, so we only need to plan this bit. If we have stockpile, like in grass that's left to grow up to use in after dormancy, then obviously we can just graze that as long as we can through the winter. But we don't need to plan that. We need to plan when it's actually growing and recovering still. So you could have a dormant plan as well, but in reality we just finish grazing till we're done and then feed silage. So you start by the months, so we always start May because that's when grass is growing. Put them up here. I've cut off these days because June and September only have 30 days, so this is 5 days at a time. And then you might put in concerns that affect the whole in vertical lines. So here we have a PDC, so I would put vertical lines here because that's a change in management. It's like, oh, you're going to have 2 people with you in the morning to show what to do. It doesn't affect our plan, but it changes things that to be aware of. Or we've got an open day, maybe we want the cows and sheep up in front field because the kids will enjoy seeing them rather than right at the back of Kent's field or something. Or all the farm managers have gone away in this week in August, so we're going to have to consider how to manage that when we're down on people, or whatever, anything that affects the whole. That could include, like in the past, that's been okay, we're borrowing a bull in September, so we want to have the bull and the cow in front field so we can watch to see how the bull's doing and if he's bred with the cows. So we would plan to have the cows at that point where we wanted, and in this planning you can work forwards and backwards to end up where you want to be, considering all those things. It might be that there are plants in the pasture, like we had yellow rattle is a plant in top field that's parasitic to grasses, and the way to get rid of it is to cut it before it goes to flower. So then we might judiciously go through top field just in that week before it goes to flower. So all kinds of considerations, anything that's affecting the whole, we want vertically like this. And then you write down the names of your paddocks, so top, front and upfield. And on this one I'm calling it K1, K2, K3. So K2 includes that extra little weird bit over the bridge, as it were. We've sometimes put that as K3 and then had K4 is the big field up to their house, but I've just included it as K2. So you write the name of your paddocks, then you write the size down in hectares, and then you estimate the quality against each other. Now if you had recorded animal days per hectare, you would write the actual animal days per hectare and it would be technically more correct. But say you're just starting up, you don't know, so go and have a look. It's like, is there bare ground? Can you see like there's more forage already in this field? And you're just making it up. But in reality of the mathematics, it affects things a little bit, but you can't mess up by doing it. So I've said top field is, and you start with 10 out of 10. So which is your best field? Top field, okay, we'll call it a 10. Front field's pretty good. Nut field, pretty good. K1 to 3, they're not so good as ours. Now you could put 6 there, it wouldn't make a massive difference. It will affect the timing that we're in fields, but not hugely. So you don't need to freak out about it, it's just a rough, quick estimate. And then we do column 2 is estimated relative paddock quality, and that's simply 10 by 1.1 hectares, 11. 9 times 0.5, 4.5. Right? So you come up with those numbers, and then you make an average of all of them. So you add those red ones up, divide it by 6.
I didn't really get that, how you got that number.
So size of the paddock in hectares, estimated quality on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being your best field, and then you multiply those two together. 10 times 1.1 is 11.
Okay.
9 times 0.5, 4.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not really the quality, it's the usefulness, right? in the whole scale?
No, it should be the quality of the forage if you're grazing animals.
Okay.
And then you take an average, so you add these red ones up, divide it by the number of paddocks, and that's what that number is. Yeah? So we just park that number, doesn't mean anything yet. Then you write down your recovery periods, and this is where this is great for people starting. It's like, well, you don't know, you've never been there before, you've never even thought about recovery periods, and you don't know how they change throughout the year. So typically now, May, growth starts going exponential, and then it tailors off and starts going slower. So you can see the recovery days will change a lot throughout the year. So what you can do with this plan that's really convenient is you can write a range. So we know at the quickest it's about 16 days, but 20, let's round it up to be safe, 20 to 45 days. And what that will give us out the other end is the maximum and minimum you can spend in the field. And then all you need to do is plan how you're going to move around, never exceeding those maximum minimums. And then you know you're not overgrazing. So it's a beautiful thing. Then you write your average grazing period. And so this is 20 divided by the number of paddocks minus 1, because it's assuming you're already in a paddock. So it's this number divided by the rest of the paddocks. Yeah? So 20 divided by 6 minus 1, 20 divided by 5 is 4. 45 divided by 5, 9. Yeah?
Divided by 5 because it's 5.
We have 6 paddocks, but
Yeah.
we're already grazing in one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay,
there's
so-
5 other paddocks.
Okay.
Yeah. So you take your recovery period, and if you don't know, and your neighbour probably doesn't know, because they probably never asked that question themselves, because they're probably overgrazing, so you have to just, you could chop a bit and fence it off and just watch it through the year. We did that the first year. We would cut every 2 weeks and just measure that time, and it's that'll give you a very good idea. Forget these red numbers for now. That's the second set of numbers we're using.
20 minus 5?
No, 20 divided by
Okay.
6 minus 1, which is
Yeah.
5. So
Yeah.
20 divided by 5 is 4.
Yeah.
45, 9. So now we're ready to calculate this bit. So, this is the operative figures, right? Forget the red ones, we're just looking at the blue ones.
That again gives us the days we would like to stay on one
No,
paddock.
no. This is just a random arbitrary seeming number called the average grazing period.
Okay.
So then what we do, to work out the minimum time we have to stay in front field, ever, we take the estimated relative paddock quality, 11, divide it by the average of all, right? So we can just do it to see. So we take 11 divided by 14.12 equals multiplied by 4, right? No, sorry, I messed that up. This is the right calculation. 11 divided by 14.12 equals times by 4 is 3.11. So we'll round that down to 3 days. Alright, divide it back by 4. Now we times it by 9. 7, so that gives us the maximum. So at any time this year, they can only stay in top field for 3 to 7 days. And as long as they only stay that long, we can't overgraze. So you see, this is creating a mathematical relationship between the whole, because there's all these other paddocks to go through. So you take the red number, the estimated relative paddock quality, divide it by the average of all, and times it by the minimum and maximum average grazing period. Yeah? So you can see then bigger fields like K1, 2 to 5 days, K2, the big fields, 7 to 15 days. However, so that would then create the guide that we make our plan in whatever way fits with our concerns and opportunities. However, we're in a funny position this year because we're saying we're going to cut the grass. So cutting the grass is going to be somewhere before mid-July, but we don't know because it's down to when the farmer has time. So let's just suppose it's the 10th of July. And this will change, but that doesn't matter. It's like a business plan or a crop plan. There will be unforeseen changes. and we'll just have to replan at that point. Yeah, but that's no big deal. At least we have a plan.
You cut all the grass to save it for.
We're cutting all of K1 to 3,
Okay.
right? So, knowing that, it's in July, so we've peaked over the most rampant growth. So I'd say the recovery, to be safe, we want to allow 25 days minimum. So let's be safe and say 30. So 10, 20, 30 days would be to this line here. You know, we're going to look at it on the ground and decide. So this would be the recovery period
For the K1 to 3.
for K1 to 3. So that means from now, basically, here, so where are we today? What's the date? 25th. This is the latest we've ever made a plan. So we are currently there, and we've got to now plan the rest of our year. Today. Now, this bit from here to here, we're not actually considering K1 to 3 because we're assuming now we're going to come off Kent's land because we want that land to grow for the next 3, 6, 8, no, it's like 45 days for that grass to regrow so we get a nice haylage cut. Yeah. So immediately I think let's bring the animals off Kent's land, let that regrow, and then when it's cut we got to let it regrow again. So from now till here, let's just say that's when it's recovered, we're not even involving K1 to 3. So therefore I think we remake these numbers because we're only dealing with our farm right now. So that's what I've done. I've just said, okay, here's the estimated relative paddock quality of top, nut and front field. And then if I add them up and divide it by 3, I get a new number here. And so then I also get a new number here because I'm dividing 20 by the number of paddocks minus 1, so 2. Yeah, so I get 10 to 22. And then when I recreate these calculations, they're very different. So that means now, if we're grazing the cows and sheep in top field, they've got to stay 10 to 24 days. In front field, 4 to 10 days. Nut field, 15 to 33 days.
Is that in the whole field?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the whole field.
Okay, so that means pretty fast going in front field, for example.
No,
Pretty slow.
quite slow
It's the
compared to the other numbers.
You stay that many days on the overall field.
So look at this. Say we look at the blue numbers. If we went to Nutfield today, we've got to stay maximum 10 days. Now Nutfield is 1.7 hectares. So this is where it starts to translate into reality. So 17,000 meters squared, a hectare is 10,000 meters squared. And we're staying there 10 days. So now every day you've got to give them 1,700 meters squared. But we're in Nutfield where the trees are 10 meters apart. So divide that by 10, that means you have to give them 170 meters by 10 meters in a day. Now that means you need 3 nets on this side, 3 nets on this side, and another net to make up the ends and that extra bit. Or you need to make up, let's say you've got a 50 meter net, so you can go 10 meters, 40 along, right? And then you could go another 50 along, so now you're 90 by 10, that's only 900 square meters. So you've got to give them 1, 2, 3, 4 nets, and then you've got to set up 4 more and move them that afternoon. And now you're on the right sort of numbers, yeah? So this will dictate how you have to set up the fences. Now I've started you off down here with the eggmobiles because they're not on the grazing plan. Yeah.
So it's like from the viewpoint of the field, if between this and that, like the blue numbers, that wouldn't be overgrazing the field, and how come like 3 times more stay?
Because we're only dealing with the mathematical equation between these 3 fields, rather
so from
than
the viewpoint of
like it's kind of like, so here let's go back to that sheet of paper. There's a couple of bits to add. there's a couple of rules of thumb that I want to bring up and then come back to your point. So if growth is fast, you move fast. And if growth is slow, then you move slow. And that's purely about recovery time. So what's happening when we've got K1 to 3, you can see we're moving much faster. That's because we've got to get round and manage all the grass. So if you went slow then, you would have a jungle at the other end. So it's all in relation to the paddocks you're using, which is why I say we should have just our land up till this point, because we're not dealing with Kent's land. So it just makes the numbers too silly. Because if we went round top field in 3 days, then went round front field, then went round nut field, the grass won't have recovered by the time we get back. Now, obviously, if you're moving them fast, they're just going to be taking the tops off the plant. They're not going to graze it down so heavily. So they might be okay, but it doesn't make sense to include Kent's land because we're not actually including it till August.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, and it gives us more flexibility, and it still means we're not going to be overgrazing.
Yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah.
You said this one would be the first half of the day and then the other half. Won't we be doing double then?
No, because you needed 1,700 meters squared.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to illustrate is like when you move into a new field, when we plot it on here, that's your job as the cow mover, is to say, tomorrow I'm moving into front field and I can see I'm going to be there for 4 days. Okay, so how big is front field? 1/2 hectare. Okay, so every day I've got to give them 1,100 square meters. And if you're using the nets and you know the trees are 12 meters apart in front field, then you can work out how many meters long you need to give them that day. So then you can sort of, and every day that you're in front field, it's the same. So it will give you a sense of like, I'm going to need 2 extra nets because I'm going down there tomorrow or whatever.
Nice.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
Let me just carry on a minute because there's another point here. So if the basic rule of thumb is if growth is fast, you've got to move fast to keep up with everything. And if growth is slow, you slow down because that increases the recovery time of every other patch on the land. And if you don't know what to do, then you slow down.
Because even if you damage the land, you damage a smaller parcel of
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
That's what we chose to do at the start of the year, is put them out on the grass, but bale graze them, and rather trash one little bit than let them not overgraze, but heavily graze everywhere. Because if you graze right as the grass has just started growing after winter, that's like making you run a marathon and then punching you in the stomach. It's not going to work out so good. So it's always better to put your attention on the best things, and that translates through all life. If you have a team of 5 and one of you is not good, it's better to put the attention on the best people and eliminate the worst, which is counterintuitive. Sometimes we try and put our energy into the weaker bit, but that's not how ecology functions in any way. It's like a business. If you have 10 products and one of them makes the most money, you leverage the hell out of that one if you're smart. But that's how nature works too. So it's like you want to take your best paddocks and impact them the heaviest. Put the animal impact there because you get the quickest returns. If you try and make something unhealthy better, it's a waste of your resources. So that's a rule that translates across everything in life, it seems. So you always put your resources into your best things because you get the return. So you see, what we're doing is creating this mathematical pattern now that will tell you what you need to do every day. Just like the gardeners have a garden plan, it's like, right, here's what we've got to do, and sometimes, there's an error, something changed, and you have to replan a bit. But you've got a plan, and if you follow that, the animals will always be fine, and the grass will be fine too. Now, it's more complicated in our farm because we have eggmobiles that have a fixed size, but when you think about fencing, we're using 100 meters of poultry net for the eggmobile, but each field has different width tree lanes, so the space that they get in a day is very different. So I've written that here. Top field has got 1,700 17,600 square meters, but the actual grazing area for the eggmobiles is only 11,000 because there's tree lanes and there's slopes they can't go down. But the tree lanes are 9 meters apart, which means if you have two 50-meter fences, it's 9 by 41, which is 370 meters squared a day. So that means 2 eggmobiles can stay there for 29 days max. And then in front field, same calculation, but it's 12 meters apart, so they actually get 70 odd 80 square meters more per day, and so they can stay in front field 10 days. And because we're moving one, then the other, it's only one space per day used, as it were. Nutfield, they've got 10 meters by 40, so 400, and they can stay 42 days. So what we'd like to plot on here is where the eggmobiles are going, because they're fixed. So they go from the top of the field to the bottom of the field because of gravity helping us move. And they follow a cycle. If they're in Nutfield now, they'll go to top field, then they go to front field, and then they keep following that cycle round and round and round. But we should plot that in because it will affect how we decide to graze the animals, because it will reduce the amount of forage where the animals, where they have been recently. Same with the boilers. It's like you've seen that thing where the ground is quite rough where the boilers have been, but then give it a few weeks and boom, it's better than it was before. So you can kind of factor that into how you're moving the animals, because there's a loss right after them in the terms of the space you're grazing, but there's a gain back there, so it can neutralize itself.
2 questions, if we have space for that.
Yes, in a second, but this same principle is how you work out how to do your fencing, right? So this is how we follow the plan. It's like you look, okay, I've got 5 days in this field, and so you calculate what your fencing needs to be so that on that right day you move to the right field. So that's like the job, is following that plan through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Question number 1, if the birds are following the cows, or we are not reaping the benefits of that?
No,
that
it's
much?
in reality that doesn't sync up very well, because the hens are on a fixed space and the cows need very different spaces, and especially now we have sheep again, they need quite a lot of space per day. So it just doesn't work out mathematically.
Keep up. Okay.
Yeah.
Second
And
question.
it's worth pointing out, it's not a huge benefit for the amount, because it's cow manure that's got the larvae, not the sheep manure. So there's not that many cows to actually feed that much fly larvae to that many chickens.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a nice idea, but it's a very minimal benefit, I would say.
Another thing, if the red numbers here are not equal because of a design flaw, or it changed.
It doesn't matter
direction.
too much. Like, you're gonna go fencing round a corner or to that weird. We may as well graze every bit of the field we can. So you know, it's.
No, the question is, why did you plant them in different distances?
That's a different question about agroforestry. We can take another time.
Yeah.
But you can see, like, there's a lot of information there if you're new to it, but like we're missing a lot of information, like all this detailed stuff about your herd and your types of animals and the weights of them and all that, and you see you just don't actually need any of that. Like, it's most typical that most people don't have enough animals on their land, certainly when they're starting out. So you've got to start somewhere, so this is the way to start. And you will quickly build up a sense of like, I could have double the animals and still not use all the forage or whatever. And as you start, you can start collecting data on the animal days per hectare or whatever. But that gets a bit more complex. So I would leave it at that, in that way for now. Obviously this can get a lot more complex, but it doesn't need to start, and it doesn't need to have good results. And the only issue would be if you had way too many animals and you couldn't actually feed them. So one thing you could start doing is like a good way to start with this also is to like estimate what a cow will eat in one day. It's like, okay, I take 7 meters by 7 meters, will that feed a cow in a day? Okay, I've got 9 cows, so let me give them 9 of them spaces and put the cows in that. And watch them for the day. It's like, have they eaten everything and they're hungry to get to the next bit? Well, then that wasn't enough. And then if they've only eaten half of it, then you know they could have less. So actually the amount of space a cow needs is tiny, but it won't like you putting it in that smaller space because it wants to run around too. So the actual space they need for feed is much smaller than the space we give them anyway. So, but that's another way you can investigate that to get a sense of like what an animal actually eats, and it's about 4% of their body weight. So if a cow's 400 kilos, like ours, then it needs 10 kilos of fodder. So you could also cut and weigh and just see what 10 kilos looks like in a square patch, or there's lots of ways you could get into that. So first thing of actually filling this in, I'm not worried about PDCs, open days, Joel Salatin coming. It's like we'll go off and see the animals wherever they are. So that's not affecting my thinking. The biggest thing for us is the cutting of the grass and the recovery after that. And I can guarantee these dates will both change because that's the way it is. Or a drought might happen again, or whatever. So we will have to replan, and what we'll do is just rewrite these numbers here and adjust the plan when we need to, and just keep doing that. But I would like to know, Christian, we'll write down the hens in orange. No, blue. We are here today in Nutfield. How many days are we going to be in Nutfield? And one thing to keep your eye on with this plan is, look, this is blocks of 5, so this would be the 26th, this next square here. That would indicate 26th, yeah?
Yeah.
So we are in the previous one today.
So I have 3 lanes for one of them, and about 2.5 for the other one.
So how many days will
So that would be
translate to?
4 per lane, and that would be 10 to 12.
Okay, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, midway. And then we're moving. So where are we going next? And I want to plot the hens now, just because they're fixed, and once we've set their rotation, it will just keep going.
It would be good to get to front field because the top field is still recuperating after the chickens.
Yes, good point. So front field, 10 days max. So we'll give them 10 days in front field. And then we're obviously going to top field. So we can have 29 days max. Now, that grass will be recovered at that point from the broilers, and it will be better than it was. And I imagine we'll do the next lot of broilers in Nutfield, I think.
Okay.
That's really soon also that they go out.
Yeah. So that will factor in. We should write them on here too. But let's say top field 29 days. Let's go for a little bit less, just in case that gets too hectic. So 15, 25. Let's go with 25, because once you get down the real bottom of top fields on those slopes, it gets a bit dicey, so don't want to push it too much. So then we're obviously back into, and I'm going to just draw that on so that next year, looking at the plan, we can see they came in earlier. So we're back to Nutfield's maximum 42 days. How long have they been in Nutfield now?
They came to 23rd, right? 23rd of April. And that means they've been there for 32 days? 31?
Yeah.
And then you're aiming for 12 more, so that's, well, about 42, a bit more.
Yeah, and they were stationary at the beginning.
Yeah.
So 10, 20,
correct. Wow.
36. Let's say we'll go for 40 days the second round. And then we'll go back. We're going to use these same numbers basically over and over. So 10 will get us to there. Now it can be, front field's very wet because it's clay. Like top field is silt at the top and clay at the bottom. Nut field is sandy on the hills and clay in the bottoms. And front field's very clay, but it also gets all the roof water off the barns and stuff. So it gets really wet. So August typically quite wet, but you never know anymore. So that would be a management concern. Like if it's too wet in front field, we would just skip that and not take the egg mobiles in because they'll get stuck. So we'll just manage that when we get to it because it's too unpredictable to know. So that means during the Joel course they would be in front field. That's nice. We'll easily go see what they're up to. Top field we'll go back to 29. I would say September. Yeah. So we could take 25. That's 27. And then hens tend to come in. If we're keeping the hens over winter, we will tend to get them in, like our season ends end of October. But depending on the weather, we would aim to get the birds in by mid-October usually. Like the tomatoes we plug at the beginning of August, and come end of September, we'll have picked everything that's not ripe, and we can put hens in at any point then. So they would go back to nut field until they go in, basically. So I'll just indicate that with an arrow. So now we know where the hens are, and that's fairly fixed. That it might change due to wet weather, but it's fairly regular. Like the cows and sheep will change more in a way. So then let's put in broilers.
Here and here is a bit sketchy with the 45 days.
Is a bit what?
Is a bit less.
That's fine now. Cows and sheep and sorry, that's egg mobiles. So this process would look different at different farms, obviously, and it's an introductory way to do it, but it works fine. That's how we do it. But because we got broilers and layers, it's a little bit more layered. That you have to think things through a little bit. Let's put broilers in and say
they're on day 14 now, and they go out on 20. How many days do they go out from?
21. Day 21.
Yeah.
So that would be.
1 week.
Do we have 31 in this?
Yeah.
So that would be first.
The 1st of June, broilers come out. So let's put them in nut field. And how long are they out? So 21 days. We were going to slaughter them in 2 goes again. So
Either 65, 56 to make sure they don't get too big.
it's just before the PDC, isn't it? So it's basically these on my calendar. It's these few days before. So we'll draw it into the PDC. And we'll make that decision call when we get there.
Yeah.
So there we go. We got broilers now. And I think it can be nice to have them in front field just so they're really close and easy to pick up, but it's more logistical going around all the corners and stuff. So it's nicer in nut field because it's just big and open. It works better. And I think it would be nice for you lot to try that pen model. So put them in Salatin pens for the first 2 weeks and then try the net system when they're already moving themselves, because it's a lot of time savings and better for the birds, and it's good to just see the difference and compare it a bit. So got them.
Why are they in nut field?
The broilers?
Yep.
Because we've had them in top field.
Yeah.
So we don't want them again on the same ground.
But we don't want grouse there to regenerate, to recover.
We do, but they're in a very small space at a small time. And what we'll do is put them up at the start of nut field. So look, this is an important thing to think about. So look, say here we're coming in on the 15th of June with the chickens.
And we move on.
Chickens aren't coming back till end of August. So because we're coming in at the top of the field and then we're coming in at the top of the field, that is the recovery period.
Yeah.
So Christian's been there 45 days. So the land at the top of nut field should be quite well recovered already.
Okay.
Certainly in 7 more days it will be. So you're measuring recovery from the start to the start again.
I see.
So it's actually very long here, you see.
So we put them up at the very end and and go down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we just have to plan cows and sheep. Now I'll do it with a thin line first and then go with a thicker line if we believe ourselves. So let's say tomorrow we're coming back to our land. So where do we want to start? Is there a good reason to start?
Well, Nutfield will be full with the broilers, and Topfield
It won't be full. Bear in mind it's going to be,
Right.
if that's Nutfield, we'll be starting 6 in a row and coming down the hill in a staggered row like that. So they'll be, they'll be out the way for most of the time, and then it might be they scoot across that way at some point. We haven't touched front field, so it could be we go straight into front field.
Good idea.
Would be logical,
Yeah,
just
would be
simplicity
logical.
wise. So let's say we come in tomorrow and we'll do this in front field. Now, so let's go, we're on these red numbers, right?
Yep.
You understand we're on the red numbers?
Yep.
And so we've got to decide, well, grass is moving fast at the moment, so we should move fairly fast. So we should take the lower number, which is 4. So I would say we nip through, but because there are, 7 lanes, maybe? I can't remember.
5 or 6. If you give 5.5 with the last one down with the pond.
Yeah.
Wasn't there another
So
map here?
let's take 5 days. It would be cool if we found the actual correct lines.
There is a map.
I don't think that's
I
accurate.
can get your on GPS.
Because let's just take a line a day for simplicity. Because it's we don't have this is saying you should be between
1, 2,
4 and
3.
10.
4.5.
So 4.5. So let's give them 5 days, and then that makes the fencing really easy. So we'll do 5 days there. I like to just mark it with a little twiddle so you really see where it's ending. And then where does it make sense to go next? Like either we go back up to Nutfield and get in there just before the broilers and shorten the grass for the broilers,
I think that's a good idea.
or we get behind the eggmobiles where it should be just recovering. But I'm speaking aloud, but it's much better to cut the grass for the broilers.
Even if we get a lot of rain, that would make the grass shorter and the birds won't get so wet and
they won't trip over and stuff. So that's a perfect thing. Do you agree?
Yeah.
'Cause this is a really nice strategy to always cut the grass in front of the young chicks because they can't step over it.
And then they're also like making friends with manure, and we reap there a bit of the benefit. So
Now we've got up to 33 days, minimum 15, right? So we've also had the eggmobiles in there. So let's say we want a mid-range between there, like 20 days or something, just to make sure we don't hit it too hard. Now, that's another thing to add on here, is like, here's my big grass plants, and this S-shaped curve comes back in another way. So I've got my little baby grasses at the start of the year. If I graze them right down to the ground, that's not overgrazing, that's heavy grazing. But if I do that with a big plant, say, and mash that right down to the ground, again, it's not overgrazing, it's heavy grazing, you know?
but it will need more
But
time.
it will
to-
need exponentially more time to get back to the same point. Right? That's where this vegetative state has been so often used. It's like if you come through in a high, rapid growing grass and just nip the tops off, it'll really quickly get back to where it was, sort of thing. But we want this because this is the apex physiological point of the grass, and by trampling it and eating a lot of it and leaving some standing, we'll get new growth again through that. But that S-shaped curve is important in that the bigger the biomass of the plant, the relatively longer it takes to recover. But what we want to do is I'm trying to just not get confused with heavy grazing and overgrazing. So overgrazing is only a function of time, ever. It's got nothing to do with how much grass you eat. That's just heavy grazing, right? So just trying to make that very clear. But the important point here then, I think we'll start drawing them in big because it sounds like a good plan so far. So what we always try and do with boilers is cut the grass first so that they're not falling over, and it's maximising the double yield, because now we've got young grass plants in June who have just been covered with manure and urine, who've now got covered in broiler shit, and they're ready to take that in. So, broilers, cut the grass for them, that's fantastic. So now we're obviously going into top field now. So how's that working out with the hens? Well, they've just come in, so they will have trampled it down. So we've got to jump ahead of them, which means we're going to be on a fairly short go through, because the hens have quite a big impact. So we don't want to take it down to nothing, or the hens will just scratch it to bare ground. So we take a shorter time there and just go through in 10 days, let's say, just to really make sure, because they're already 4 days in, so the hens will be in the top couple of lanes. So we've still got most of the field, but the other thing about top field is we've got all that bit down the valley to graze as well, including there's contoured lines of trees on the bank behind the hill there. So it gets a bit funky grazing in there. So I say let's do 10 days on the field surface and a couple down the valley bit, so we'll make it 12 days. Because we have the extra space that the hens can't actually go down, if you see my thinking. So that's a fairly short period, and that keeps us safe there. We could even extend that, but let's think. We would then go to front field again, which will have had the hens, and then it will have had 25 days recovery odds, so that should be okay.
If we have rain.
Yeah, we should do, and it's good growth at that time. So I think we would take a longer time this time and really go through front field trimming it down, because this is the time of year when everything's like really overgrown, so we may as well use that biomass and take them through on the long haul all the way to there. And then we're coming back to Nutfield, who are just with the hens too. But the boilers will have come through, but they won't have taken up anywhere near the whole field, so the cows can just jump ahead of the hens again.
And go quick again.
And, well, let's see, where's our days of rest? So they could be in there quite a while, but we're going to have that period here somewhere where we jump into Kent's land too. So we've got a gap now of 30 days roughly till we're off our farm suddenly. So we want to actually make sure we graze around our farm well, because then it's only the layers to keep the grass down until we come back again. So I'd say we want to go through probably quite well then, like a bit slower even, to make sure we take it down. The boilers will have taken part of the field down quite well, and we'll be having 3, 6, 7, 8, 40 days recovery. So I think we should take like a 20-day sort of length period there, and that will clean up what the boilers haven't taken down and still leave enough trampled for the, what are they called, hens. So that would be 1920, and then we don't have many days left, so it's like at that point we could decide whether we want to crash them through the forest paddock for a few days, because they're near the gate for Nutfield. It's easy to get them in, and just give them like 2 days in there to like graze that down and keep that turning back into agroforestry. Well, that's not on our grazing plan, but we could just say we're going to do that. So we could say, we should do it in black just so it's there, but we could say forest paddock.
Which one is that exactly?
The one on the, as you go up to the turning circle, you've got that patch on the right
okay.
where we ran pigs and then cows and sheep. It's nice to get some grassland manure dropped in there and seed, etc., and just graze it again. So we could just crash them through there for 2 days. And then we're anticipating another like 7 or 8 days till we're off our farm. So either we go jumping into front field or top field, because look, we've got a long gap now in top field before the hens come back in. It's like nearly 2 months. If we look at front field, it's the same, but front field's a bit damaged because of the mud tracks and stuff. So I'd be tempted to go back into top field and just make sure we clean up, and that leads us to Kent's land. So it just feels logical. We will probably have to change this plan before that point anyway, just for natural, you know, the weather, etc. But let's say we clean up in here before going to K1, and what we might find will happen is, I'll just indicate that by writing K1 there. So that's just telling me, like, you know, we might vary that a few days depending on when Kent's is ready. But because this might shift so much when they cut the grass, we might have to replan this bit fully, you know, but that's no problem. You know, it might be we just go into front field for a few days and then go to Kent's, but I'm happy leaving it there, you know. So then we would want to go back through Kent's land and our land, but we can now consider if we want to leave anything for stockpile. So August would be the date to stockpile. If we left Kent's land until the end of August, we would then be able to graze through all of that after dormancy. Right, so we could make a decision on one extreme is leaving all of Kent's land totally and then graze it all through the winter, or as far into winter as we can. Or another option at the other end of the spectrum is to include it now with these new numbers and start moving really fast, or relatively faster. So that would be big moves, and for that we would want to use the reel systems, like to go through K2 in 15 days, say. You'd want really big paddocks, so we would use the reels, not the nets, to make it much quicker. So we've got to decide what to do. Now, we could even leave it open and not decide, and just make a conscious decision to not decide, because we know that we can either just graze our own land and it'll all be fine. You can see this cycle will just continue, sort of thing. Or we can choose to graze all of it for the rest of the year. But we could even just leave it there and say we don't know what we're going to do yet, and we will decide to plan the rest of it when we know the grass is being cut.
This seems the most reasonable.
Because
we can plan it, but it makes no sense.
The only concern, not a concern, but the only thing with planning the rest of it here is that I know it's going to change with this bit. So we'll just have to replan it anyway. And I think you get the idea.
By mid-August, we will have more of an understanding of the weather of the summer and all that.
Yes.
To move from.
And it's not like,
data.
In theory, you have to have your complete plan together to know it's a plan. But I know that we can plan it in either direction, no problem.
Because we have more land than
I'm
necessary.
fine leaving the plan. If you'd never done it before, you would want to plan all year to know that your plan works as a whole. But I'm just telling you, yes, it can work. Whichever way we decided to do it, we can make it work. We just follow the numbers. So I think that's a good point to just draw it there. Because we'll probably find we have to replan this bit anyway by the time that, because it might be like, oh, I've got to cut grass here. It's like, oh, well, we didn't plan for that. So then we would sit down and replan. So.
And then the third batch of broilers would be.
If we do a third batch of broilers, that would then need to either go in front field, or it could go in the bottom of top field, or it could go lower down in nut field.
If we do, we're not sure yet, or.
We're not totally sure yet.
Why is that?
Because we're unsure. We're unsure. Don't know. But if we did, we would put them in like front field's just a bit of a pain. It could do with a bit of nutrient deposit, but we've been doing turkeys in there more recently and keeping turkeys and chickens apart because of the risk of blackhead disease. So turkeys have always been done on Kent's land, or we've done them in front fields and not used the egg mobiles in front fields or the broilers. But I'd say we're not sure if we're doing a third batch, and if we did, they would come out, we would pick them up somewhere here. I can't remember the date, but they wouldn't come out till like this bit. They'd be fairly late. And we could replan it with this bit in mind.
If it's broilers, right?
Yeah.
Like a best thing would be to get the batch ready around here. Get the new
To
ones.
get them coming out now.
Yeah, to not get them too late in the season.
Yes,
Because
it
the
would be
cold
better.
And, the cold and the wet is gonna reduce the numbers greatly.
Well, do we want to do a third batch?
Yeah, that's a question. Like, why?
Well, that's-
why is it a question, or why?
Well, I guess it depends on when the latest we can order them anyway. So
You can't, like, if we ordered them now, we wouldn't get them till probably there. So they wouldn't come out till July. But I would like to have, it would be fun to have them on the ground during the Joel course, because that's obviously a big part of what Joel does, and that would be, it would be enough of a consideration for me. But then you would want to slaughter there. So we could work back like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So maybe we order them mid-July and aim to slaughter them right here before September. Because August is often a very nice month here. It's like summer. You know, it's weird that the clocks are changing now, but often summer is actually here. So you don't want broilers mid-September onwards really on the field. But I think slaughtering there would be good. So let's make a note of, we would want to slaughter batch 3, slaughter there. So where's it specifically? So this is 8 weeks, so 1. Hang on, how many days are they, do we want them outside?
we want them outside for 36.
36 minimum. So 10, 20, 36. So we would need them in the brooder there. I can take that back to Johanna and see what we think.
Yeah, I would
So
like
that
to
would mean
understand also
Ordering them like here.
the decision making behind it. Like, is there any reason not to do it? I mean, it seems like it's a significant income from the farming aspect.
Yes, it's whether we want to be selling them over the winter and not feeling totally sure what winter might look like at this point. But I think it would be good to have the income for sure. And I think it would be good to have...
You have a year of freezer time, so...
Yes, it's just a bit of uncertainty about other things that are a bit further reaching than that. So that definitely affects those things. But I think it's good we mark that 15th of June. I'll put that in my calendar because I think that would be nice. Like if people are coming for Joel's course, it's really nice to hear him talk about, you know, his observations and stuff like that. Maybe get him in the slaughtery and we can do a chicken juggle.
Blindfolded challenge.
Yeah. I can race him, there you go.
Yeah, so let's go through tomorrow, for example.
So tomorrow we're going to front field. So we would need to set up a passageway. Let's say they're over here in K2, K1. We would want to get, either we just try a big run and run them all over. My concern, like, they're not that attracted to Kent's land. My concern is they'd run off in top field. So it might be wise when we get to the river bridge to put fencing up the driveway to the road, just there.
So they don't.
And then we run them down into
Front field.
yeah. So have someone at the bottom of Kent's land, someone on the road, and run them into front field. And when we
Should we-
get into front field, we walk them up to the top and start top to bottom.
So we should go top to bottom.
Always top to bottom.
Okay, so I can fence off the top today.
You could make up a fence there, and that fence would be 1,000 square meters a day.
What do
Right?
you see again? 1,000?
It's 5,000 square meters.
Yeah, okay.
5 days, so they need 1,000 square meters a day. However, in this case, because we've got the tree lanes, it's essentially one whole lane a day. So I would set up maybe, like, you could just move them in 2 net fences. So you could set up 2 nets, and you might just have to move them 1 or 2 times that day. But it might be quicker than setting up 6 nets and then setting up the next move of 6 nets. You know, it can be quicker just to move them. And that's actually a way that you can work with your grazing, because you have so that thing of impact. How are we doing for time? Because I've got 2:40, I've got to go for interview now. But the animal impact, so we're working with grazing of the actual grass, but we're also working with trampling and the spreading of manure, and we're working with impact of hooves on the ground that break down old plant matter and spread it, etc. So it's very different. You could give them one big fence that day, but the impact on the grass is better if you give them a small patch, then another small patch mid-morning, and then another one after lunch. And also, it's all much more complex, right? Like, if you look at the sugar in the plant, after lunch, it peaks to like 2 p.m. and then goes down again due to respiration. So, for example, by moving your dairy herd after lunch, you can get 1 kilo more of milk per cow just by moving at that time, not in the morning. So there's layers of complexity that you could add to this, and you could spend your life deepening the understanding of it. But I just wanted to say that about animal impact. It's like, it's even better to do it this way. It's just impractical for the size of the animals, but then you increase the impact even more. So it's just it's another thing that we're working with. But I would say work with 2 fences and just do multiple moves that add up to that. When you get to a bigger field, you might want to say, because look, here we're 20 days in 1,700 square meters. So that's 900 square meters. So when we get to Nutfield, 900 square meters a day, and you're in 10 meter rows, so 10 by 40 is 400. So basically you could do 2 nets and do 2 moves again. And it's a bit less, it's going to be 800 meters squared, not 900. But maybe that's fine, because it's just not practical to have a third move that's a little bit bigger, Or if you want to geek out, you could just add a 3rd net to the 2nd move that's just not fully open or whatever, Like, we want to stick to the plan, but the point is there's a little bit of flex because of these numbers, so it's got to be practical too. And what we can do later on is maybe get the reels out and try see if the lambs will stay in. Certainly as the lambs get bigger, they'll stay in the reel system, because right now they could just jump.
The reel is the quick fencing.
No,
What is the reel?
that's more of a temporary one. It's the same sort of thing, but it's 3 standalone reels. So you take the orange posts, and then you just reel out each reel, and it locks into this metal post. But then you can make 500 meters, so you can make much bigger paddock. And these are geared, so you can wind them up really fast, like at walking speed. So. Well, if you made it this far, well done for watching all the way through, and I hope you found that useful. So I'm here at the farm still, and we've been doing a lot of interviews so far for the Farm Like a Hero experience, and I'm not going to get on the road now. I'm going to be doing Zoom interviews, and I've been finding it really powerful and interesting to speak with people in long form conversation without you know, obviously it's sad to not be at the farms and share that with you visually, but we're going to be doing a PDF book of all the farms we speak to, where you'll really get to see them visually and hear more of their backstory. But it's been an amazing process so far. I've really enjoyed speaking with people, and we get into a range of topics that you just wouldn't if we were looking around the farm. And amazing to hear people's stories. This really was about shining light on the unsung heroes, the people that are out there just doing amazing stuff that you probably wouldn't hear about otherwise. And so I really wanted the tour to focus on people that you probably haven't heard of before, and I feel like there's so much value in hearing everyone's stories of how they got into it. People with different scales, different ideologies, different resource bases, and yeah, I've really enjoyed doing the interview so far. So happening on a daily basis. We're going to launch that project very soon. It's a low-cost membership designed to get a network going in Europe, and we'll be doing live questions and answers weekly, as well as putting together this book, all of the long-form interviews and MP3 files, so you can listen to it as if it was a podcast. And then we'll have a dedicated Facebook group where we can connect and really try and make an active group of regenerative farmers around Europe. So can't wait to tell you about that very soon. I know a lot of you have been waiting, and can't wait to see you in there. So we'll keep you posted as soon as we know when that's launching. See you in another video soon, folks. Bye for now.